Runaway Amish female, great to see you. Just finishing up a couple prep items here, and we'll get rocking and rolling. All right, all right. Drop, welcome. Great to have you this evening. All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. So we are going to be covering Domain 1 Security Plus SY0-701. This will be a review of everything that we've covered over the past couple weeks. You'll probably recognize most of the slides. I recycled a lot of the material, but we're going to kind of go back over it, highlight the key points, things that we need to keep an eye out for the exam, and things that are going to be covered coming up down the road that we've got to have those foundations as we get further in. But welcome, happy to have you all here this evening, and looking forward to spending the evening going over all this with you. It's not so much about what I can teach you, it's what I can learn from you. So please send me messages in chat, anything that you want me to explain further, anything else that I can delve into, even any questions that you have that aren't particularly related to our topics tonight. I'm happy to chat as well. We can spend a few minutes at the end and jaw jack. So hope y'all are doing great this evening. Thank you again, and we'll get rocking and rolling here. So we've got our 4 objectives for Domain 1. Compare and contrast various types of security controls, summarize fundamental security concepts, explain the importance of change management process and the impact to security, and explain the importance of using appropriate cryptographic functions. So the first part is our security controls. Oh, great. We got somebody spamming our chat. Fantastic. Back here. Let me handle this guy real quick. All right, he is gone. Perfect. All right, so our security controls. So the primary security controls that you're going to encounter on the exam, and depending on what book you read, or even for other exams, they may break these down a little bit further, but your technical controls, essentially anything that is technology to solve for a physical control problem. So things like key cards to allow access, biometrics, pin pads, anything that you can protect using technical controls. So even firewall rule sets, things like that do apply there as well. So more about the configuration and implementation of those rules, and actually using them to protect your network is considered technical control. The policies that go behind that would be your operational control. So the third one on our list here. Essentially, those are the policies and procedures that secure and monitor your data. So how data is stored would be operational, but how you're actually storing it could be technical or it could be physical if you're putting it into a safe. But the process that you write that out to, here's how this works, makes that a operational control, whereas actually putting something in the safe and locking the safe itself is the physical control. And then your managerial controls essentially focus on managing the risk. They're the controls that you use to identify your gaps, to identify any shortcomings, or finding issues or gaining certifications, things like that, within your security environment. Exam tip, again, kind of blurring those lines. The questions will try and blur the lines of how these controls work. So, like I said, you may have something that it reads like it is, say, a guard, and what are the policies that, or the orders that are given to the guards? What are those? Well, the guards themselves are physical controls, but the orders that they're given of how to patrol and where to patrol, those are operational controls. So depending on how that question's phrased, it could be physical or it could be operational. But if they're focusing mostly on the policy, that is where you're going to lean into the operational controls. So when you dig into breaking down those controls, you have different subcategories. Essentially, your preventative controls, things that will stop somebody from doing something. Your deterrent controls essentially discourage them. So preventative is like putting up a fence. Deterrent controls are going to be the sign on the fence that says "Beware of dog." So it makes them think twice about climbing over that fence. Additionally, things like razor wire, it can be a preventative control, but it can also be a deterrent control, as you know, somebody probably doesn't want to get cut up trying to climb over that fence. So it's going to prevent them, but it's also going to discourage them when they see that. So they're not even going to try and attempt to climb over the fence. Good evening, Jesse. Great to see you. Detective controls essentially identify those, right? Just like a detective finds the clues, you're trying to find potential violations. Corrective, essentially being able to restore back to the original, or back to a functioning environment. So things like your disaster recovery plan, your business continuity plan, those are corrective controls, and how those are built out, that is a series of corrective controls to restore your company back to working order after an incident. And then compensating controls are essentially fill a gap when you're not able to implement a specific control. So something like PCI DSS, you see this quite often, where you can't necessarily patch the payment terminals. You can't actually do anything with them because they may be running an older version of Windows. They may be running Windows 7 that's no longer supported, but you still have to have some level of security on those devices. So you put in compensating controls that essentially do the function of kind of what the idea was to get to that level of security, but you're not doing a direct patch on those particular endpoints. You're protecting the network through network segmentation, firewalls, a strict intrusion detection, intrusion prevention system, but putting in other controls that provide that same level of security and maintain that same idea that your requirements have, just achieving them through a different route. Justin, good to see you. You made it out. Directive controls essentially are informing employees what they need to do to achieve security objectives. So your policies and procedures, training, sending out regular emails, things like that, just to keep people aware of changes to policies or new threats that have come out. If you're having weekly meetings with your team, things like that, to keep everybody up to date, and reinforcing that importance of security in the organization. So our security fundamentals comes pretty much everywhere you look. Doesn't matter what organization, what exam it is. The CIA triad is going to be essentially your foundation for security. It all ties back to these three things: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. They are the core of cybersecurity. I put non-repudiation in here because you'll start to see that a lot as you study, and you continue to see it more and more. But confidentiality, essentially protecting the security and privacy of sensitive data or communications. Integrity, just making sure that data is complete and unmodified. And availability, ensuring that the data and services can be used or retrieved when necessary. So just making sure that, if you've got backups, that they are available to you and that you can restore from them, and that they are complete and unmodified, and that they're not just sitting out in a leaky S3 bucket on AWS. So just making sure that they're completely secure and everything is the way it should be. And then non-repudiation essentially comes down to to repudiate is to deny action. So being able to essentially say that non-repudiation ensures that wherever the data came from or a message came from, it is in fact from the original sender. They cannot say that they did not send that. It's digital signatures, things like that. You start to see it more and more as we get further into the studies for SY0-701, but non-repudiation comes up pretty consistently. Your AAA, you will see this a lot as well. And this is your authentication, authorization, and accounting. So big thing here is the difference between authentication and authorization. Authentication is being able to verify somebody's identity. So being able to verify that that individual or system is who they say they are. Authorization is that whoever is authenticating is actually permitted to access the data. So authorization is the yes, authentication is just checking to see who it actually is. And then accounting is essentially your reporting for those requests, for those attempts and failures to log in, and that just ensuring that services are being properly monitored and you can see the activity that is associated with it. And then kind of threw this in here. I didn't really have a whole lot to go into on as far as gap analysis. It didn't need a whole slide, but reviewing your control objectives. So where you want to be as an organization, and then where you are, and that gap in between. So where your controls do not meet the objectives, that is your gap. And that's where you're looking into digging in deeper and trying to spend as little money as possible to get the most bang for your buck to bring yourself up to that level. So that's where you bring in outside companies to do an analysis and start to dig in deeper into your gaps and find the weaknesses. Yeah, I'm just running away. I can definitely go back here. So yeah, we'll go back to the CIA triad. And I'm happy to post any of this in the Discord as well. I mean, this is all for the community. I'm not doing it for big bucks or anything like that. This is just me happily sharing my time. So anything you want out of the slides, I'm happy to share them after everything's done. Just let me know once you got that screenshot. Awesome. All right. So something that you have probably seen a million times at this point. It became very popular towards the end of 2021 into 2020, into 22 into 23 is zero trust. So zero trust essentially is a perpetual check of who somebody is, what they're doing, and are they actually permitted to be accessing the materials that they're accessing. So you essentially have these policy enforcement points that a system that is trying to connect into your enterprise resource, they have to go through these policy enforcement points where the policy engine and the policy administrator make the decisions whether or not you're allowed to access that particular asset or that database or whatever it may be that you're trying to use within the enterprise. So anything that goes into it, whether it's your SIM, your identity management, threat intelligence, everything gets pushed into this. So the policy enforcement point, once the system hits it, if it's looking and it sees that, you know, you're logging in from Europe at 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, you know, it's probably going to say, well, hold on, there's something not right with that, first of all, because this person is based in Alabama and they're on Central time. So it's in fact 2 o'clock in the morning for them. That's not normal. They don't normally do that. So your activity logs and your SIM will all be pumping data into this and pulling data out and looking at it and seeing, okay, at this policy enforcement point, does this match our policies and should we allow them to actually go through? So it's a lot of integrations between different devices and different tools, but essentially comes down to trust but verify. So this least privilege access, essentially you can trust that they are who they say they are, but every single time you try to access something, it's going to verify it. And it's going to say, okay, are you in fact who you say you are? Do you actually have permission to access this? And it's like operating like you think that you've been breached 100% of the time. So everything is just in time. It's just at the last second to give you access to it. So you're not just permitted access 24/7 just because you have the correct login and you logged in once in the past 24 hours. So like my corporate network will have me log in. If I've been idle for 30, 40 minutes, I'll have to relog back into Splunk or to Exonius or one of the tools that I'm using because it's sensitive data that I'm working with. And, you know, they're not going to trust that I'm still sitting at my computer. I haven't used the tool. I haven't clicked on anything in it in 30 minutes. It's already logged me out and I got to log back in and go back from the beginning. So it's probably the most secure way to operate. It does put a little bit more burden on the users, but once you get used to working with it like that, it's not a huge deal. Deception and disruption. So essentially trying to fool your attackers and make their lives harder. So you've got your honeypots, honey nets, and then honey files. So your honeypot essentially setting something that looks valuable just inside the firewall, maybe parallel with your other servers, but something that looks like it is extremely valuable and they want to get to that particular item. But you've got it loaded up with a lot of monitoring, a lot of reporting, so you can see what they're doing when they come into it. Are you talking on the previous slide here? The SIM system. That's your security event and incident management system, or security event and information management. It's, I think, incident management if I remember correctly. But essentially, that's your Splunk. That's CrowdStrike, Microsoft Sentinel. It's your big data system that's pulling all of your logs and correlating everything to essentially give you feedback on the events happening within your network. Let me know if that answered your question, Amish Runaway. Oh, sorry. Yeah, my fat head in the way. Yeah, so it's the SIM, so security SEIM. I'll make myself a little smaller there. You got it. No, I appreciate you letting me know. I'm not watching my stream over on my other screen here. I'm checking chat, but that's about it. I'm not focused that far to my right, so. But kind of getting back to it, I mean, honeypots and honey nets are very similar as far as their functionality. You're essentially wanting to try, and when an attacker gets in, give them something that looks like real data or is kind of a skewed mirror of actual data. You don't have any production data or anything like that in it, but you want to make it look like it's legitimate and be able to monitor what their patterns are and how they attack it and how they get into the system. And then when they get into it, what do they do? And be able to collect all that telemetry. And so when you have something like a honey net, you'll use fake telemetry in the network to actually make it look like these servers are communicating and there's data being uploaded consistently, and there's a whole lot going on. Users are connecting to it, so it looks like it's a production network. So when they're in there, you get the best feel for how these attackers are working, because they think that, you know, somebody could be watching this, or somebody may see that we're in here, or be able to identify the system not working properly. So it gets you the best feel for how these attackers actually would move within your network. And then honey files are essentially designed to look like legitimate data. So you'll have something that is here's the keys for our AWS infrastructure, all of our security keys, and you have them stored on a file on a server. And you make it look like they're actually keys that are in there, but they're not anything that has to do with your network. But when that file is accessed, modified, moved, it'll trigger an alert through, and you can use something as simple as Windows event monitor. But you can have the system events actually trigger alerts and send it off to the SIM system and log all that data for you. You have it dumped to a syslog server. Syslog is what I was looking for. But have it dumped off, and then you have all that data about who tried to access it and when. So you can tell if it's, yeah, exactly, my bank's passwords. I had a boss once that he actually had a file on his desktop that was CRM SFP, is like, can't remember my stupid effing password. And that was what he had, all of his passwords stored in an unsecured Excel file sitting on his desktop. Drove me up the wall. And not to count the number of passwords that he had stuck to post-it notes on the bottom of his keyboard and everything else. Like, he was truly Carl. So all right, so change management. This is everybody's favorite. It is about as dry as it can get as far as security goes. A lot of people, you've got to deal with it, but it is unfortunately necessary, but it is what drives our security process and procedures. So essentially it is setting your baselines and then having ways to make changes in a systematic process, requiring approval, input from your project managers, your stakeholders, the users, getting full feedback and having that feedback loop in order to make changes in the system with minimal impact to the organization. So when you're preparing these, you'll do an impact analysis, essentially the possibility that you have negative impacts, or are we actually going to get the benefit out of making these changes? Or if we don't make the changes, what's the risk that we're accepting when we do that? And then backout plans essentially are your way to get back to working. If you go and you put in changes and you update a server and then all of a sudden nobody can communicate with it, like, how do you get back to original operating, your operating environment again? So most of the time you use maintenance windows, typically off peak times. So you have minimal interruption to the network. And then your standard operating procedures are exactly what they sound like. It's essentially the pattern, the process that you follow through the change management process. So like the diagram on the right, essentially stakeholders. So your users, somebody puts in a request, and then a project manager can go and register, look at the change, see what it is, put that request into the change log, and then submit that to the change board. Essentially, normally it'll be stakeholders, it'll be upper management, it'll be part of the IT team, or the product owners that actually support that product. And It'll go into the change management process. If they accept it, then you update the plans, and then the requester has to update the change log that, hey, so the project manager will go back and go, okay, we got the change approved. And then that project manager's team will be the ones implementing that change. So you normally have a cross-functional team, people that are technical, people that are support, have a full team, different skill sets in order to implement it and make sure everything goes off without a hitch. Or if it does, you revert to your backup plan. So we'll jump into the final section here, cryptography. So we're back to that CIA triad. And again, everything you look at that you do in cybersecurity comes back to the CIA triad. So primarily with cryptography, you're going to be dealing with confidentiality and integrity. Availability, cryptography normally doesn't have much to do with availability unless it is really just protecting keys and making sure that somebody can't break into a password and take a server down. So it kind of falls back under confidentiality, falls back under integrity when you start trying to justify that cryptography is for availability. But it focuses primarily on your confidentiality and your integrity. So essentially protecting your data at rest and in transit is your confidentiality. And then integrity, using hashing and message digests in order to verify that those files are unchanged and that they're in their original configuration. So your authenticity and your non-repudiation, essentially that comes down to your digital signatures and digital certificates. So essentially digital signatures saying, yes, I in fact did send this file, here's proof that I sent it, and here's proof that the message that I've sent has not been changed. And then digital certificates, essentially being able to authenticate to a service or be able to create a session with somebody and exchange those certificates to verify who you are or who that service is that you're trying to work with, that they are in fact who they say they are, and having a third party through use of digital signatures to verify that they are in fact who they say they are, and have that non-repudiation. So there's no way to say that they aren't who they say they are. Ciphers are your algorithms. That is the basic blocks of cryptography. So how you actually encrypt and decrypt data. And then the types of ciphers, you have block ciphers, which work on chunks of data. So large sections of data. And when I say large, sometimes it's like 48 bytes. It's not a huge chunk, but I mean, when you've got stuff flowing pretty quickly, it goes fast, especially with our current technology. And then stream ciphers work on one character or bit of a message at a time. And those are essentially ciphers that you would use in voice over IP, or you use it in, like we're doing right now on Twitch or on YouTube. Stream ciphers are what encrypts that data and sends it over to you, one single bit at a time. So uses for encryption, you can use it to obfuscate data, so make it so that data doesn't look like what it is. You can essentially hide data using it. Steganography, you can also, is a form of encryption. Essentially kind of works with that obfuscation. You can hide data within images or within audio files. Tokenization is taking a word or an identifying value for an individual in a database or something like that and replacing it with another value. So essentially removing that identifying piece of information, replacing it with something else that only the person with the list of tokens and their matches can actually put the two back together. So it is reversible, but it is, unless you have both parts of the token, you don't know what it is. Data masking is essentially when you look at your credit cards and you punch it in a web browser and then it only shows you the last 4 digits and everything else is asterisks. That's data masking. It's masking the first part of that card number. Hashing is when you take essentially a hash of a file. So you pass the file through an encryption algorithm, or a hashing algorithm, not an encryption algorithm, but it creates a hash. So anything that's, I mean, really from about 64 bits up to, I mean, you can have 2048-bit hashes, but it essentially says that this file is what it is at this point in time. And if there's any changes made, even if it's within that file, you change the letter A from lowercase to uppercase, it completely changes that hash beginning to end. So it does not match. It completely, it's a essentially a waterfall effect across the hash, completely changes the value. Salting is used in conjunction with hashing. Essentially, when you have the algorithm that you're putting in, you can have a salt that is an additional value that is put in to further encrypt that hash and make it harder to decipher. So if you have a rainbow table or anything like that, you can salt the hashes and make them longer. You can make them more complicated. You essentially pass it through another round of hashing and make them harder to decipher, or be able to compare against anything that you have. Digital signatures, we'll get into those a little bit more, but that's essentially being able to take a message and sign it with a key that only you know, and anybody who has your public key, your shared key, can look at it and go, yes, that is in fact Taylor who sent that message. And by verifying it, you can tell that I was the one that actually made that hash, or was encrypted that, so you could decrypt it using the public key. Let's see here, certificates. We'll get into those a little bit more as well. I've got a slide on those. Key stretching, again, it kind of falls in with the hashing and salting. You're able to pass it through a couple extra times, be able to add values to it, to make it longer than what it actually is, and kind of make that data a little bit harder to decrypt, or harder to match up to a known hash or known value. Blockchain and the open public ledger. So we're all familiar with blockchain with cryptocurrency. Essentially, it's a ledger. Essentially, it's like you would have in a bank. Like it's a ledger of transactions, and every time that somebody makes a change to that ledger, it is locked in, it is verified, and it is unable to be changed once it's done. So that's why, I mean, you can start to backtrack and trace transactions in the blockchain, just through the way that changes have to be verified. They have to be essentially ratified by everybody, and pass through essentially it's a series of hashes, and they all build off of each other, going through. But blockchain's a pretty small part of the exam. It's more knowing kind of what it is and what the function is. Just knowing that it's an immutable ledger that cannot be changed once it is done. Amish Runaway, I will, if you're in the Discord, I'll throw some more information up on the salting and the key stretching. I've got some stuff on those from my classes at WGU. And then elliptic curve cryptography. This is going to be your Diffie-Hellman. This is going to be essentially a more difficult way for somebody to get that particular hash. Justin, great to see you. Thanks for coming out. But I'll dig into this a little bit further. But when you think elliptic curve, I mean, think this crazy diagram. But at one point in time, the value may be P. The next time it's going to be Q. Next time it's going to be R. It's kind of like a rolling code garage door. It's constantly changing. But if you have, yeah, that's pretty much it. You're just taking X and Y coordinates, and every time they are unique. But it also should be that if you say somebody breaks it and they get Q, they can't easily find R or P. So they may only be able to get into data that was encrypted with Q, but anywhere else on this line, they can't do anything with it. It's, they call it perfect forward secrecy. Essentially, you can that secret is going to be secure going forward, because of the changes in that algorithm. Yes, yeah, you can replicate them if you have the keys and you have the base functions, what the values were that went into it, but it is definitely very hard to do. You essentially have to know all of your variables in order to get back to where you were. So that's why in elliptic curve, you're going to have stuff stored in your hardware security modules, and things like that. You're gonna have super high security on it. So kind of looking through my new book here, I just got the guide from Cybex for Security Plus. Got it late last week, and digging into it, there's a little bit you have to know as far as the ciphers and stuff like that. You don't necessarily have to know as much as like for what is it, SSCP. You've got to know all of this, but basic things is you're looking at your stream ciphers. You want to know that Ray and Cindy danced 4 hours doing the cha-cha on stream, so Ray and Cindy 4 is your RC4 and the cha-cha. So those are your stream ciphers. Asymmetric antlers on a D-deer. Oh, let me go back here. That essentially breaks down Diffie-Hellman, Elgamal, elliptic curve, DSA, and RSA. So break these down. All right, essentially those are all your asymmetric ones that you're going to have to know. And then everything else is a symmetric block cipher. So Blowfish, all right, RC5, all right, it's all block ciphers. And then Camilla's 128-year-old cat. So Camilla, AES, and Two Fish. Those are 128-bit block ciphers. Everything else is 64-bit. So kind of makes it easy. You have 3 that are 128-bit. Everything else is 64 or uses a variation of it. So like RC5, it can be 128-bit, but most of the time it's going to be 64, sometimes 32. But for the most part, those are your 3 that you need to know that are 128. And I'll throw this. I've thrown it into Discord before, but I'm happy to share this. I got this from one of my classes as well. So your symmetric encryption is the key is the same for both parties. It's the same key to decrypt and encrypt the data. So it is fast because you don't have to use one key to encrypt, one key to decrypt. You've got a big issue if you lose the key, you've lost your security. So the biggest thing here is it is fast, but not necessarily as secure as some of the other ways of using asymmetric encryption. Now you have the AES, which is your advanced encryption standard. That is the strongest encryption currently. That is what is essentially approved as the strongest encryption out there. Before that, it was DES and triple DES and RCA. The RCA, I believe, is still relatively secure, but not as secure as AES. And then Two Fish and Blowfish were candidates to become the advanced encryption standard, but they did not make it into that. Did not make it to that level of testing and get accepted. Exam Slayer, you can absolutely get this on replay. My YouTube channel, I do have this on auto record, so I can drop that link in chat. Let me share that real quick. All right, you should see it there in chat. All right, and then the biggest thing with symmetric encryption as well is for each communication pairing. So if you have 10 people, the number of keys that you have to have is 10 times 9 divided by 2. So you're talking 45 keys, individual keys for each of those pairs to communicate. So for 1 and 2 to communicate, you've got to have 1 key. For 1 and 3 to communicate is another key. For 2 and 3 to communicate is another key. So it quickly adds up to a very large number of keys. And at that point, it makes it very vulnerable because you've got all these keys that have to be tracked. They have to be kept up with. So symmetric is typically not used except for something like your theft prevention module, things that are where you have it stored in essentially a hardware security module. That key is stored in a specific environment. Yeah, Amish Runaway. So essentially the formula here is, so just for simplicity of numbers, you have 10. So the number of people is n. So you have 10 and then 10 minus 1. So you have 10 times 9 and then divide that by 2. So you have 90 here, and then divided by 2 is 45. So you need 45 individual keys for each pairing to have secure communication using that symmetric key, which is where you get into asymmetric, and it breaks it down to where each person only has 2 keys. So the number of keys drops significantly because that 10 all of a sudden only becomes 20 keys instead of 45. If you're looking at an organization of 1,000 people, you start ending up with a lot of keys very quickly. So that's the benefit of it. I mean, you end up with 10,000 people. I think it's like 45,000 keys in order for everybody to have secure communication. So that's why you end up using asymmetric encryption. So the key escrow, this essentially, you will start to see this more with cloud than anything else, but there are different ways for on-prem, and even in some cloud situations, you do have hardware security modules. You can actually purchase them from the cloud providers in your cloud environment. And essentially it is a module that is tamper resistant, so it's not able to be broken into. You can't see the data moving around. You can't see the keys. Even if you open it up and connect right to the board, it's going to wipe itself as soon as that case is opened. Or some of the like level 4 HSMs are tamper resistant enough. They have acid, a vial of acid that will actually drop onto the security processor or that chip and destroy it as soon as you break the seal on it or you try to open up that HSM. But you use them for signing certificates, and creating that public key infrastructure within your corporate environment. You can use them for authentication. They'll actually do all your key verification. It'll organize all your keys for user authentication and authorization. And then it also does all your logging and everything else. So the HSMs are huge as far as security, and you can also use them to store keys for encrypted hard drives, for backups and things like that. So even if so-and-so had something encrypted, but their key was stored in the HSM, you can have an authorized party that can actually get that key out of the HSM one time and recover that data. And then after that, that key is destroyed, and the HSM will actually, what they call a crypto shredding. Essentially, once that key is pulled out of there, it doesn't know that key anymore, and that data is destroyed. So you've got that used for authentication of a user's public key. Yep. And then the key management system is a cloud service, and we'll get more into cloud as we get into Amish Runaway. It's kind of like a password manager, but it's a lot more secure than that. Essentially, it is all of your organization's secrets in one spot. So it sounds like it could be vulnerable, but they're typically very, very highly secured. And normally your HSM is not directly communicating with a user's computer. It's normally going through a stack of other tools and using other systems to communicate those exchanges. I don't think so. I guess if you had kind of the same idea as a password manager, or a password manager would use something similar, but it wouldn't be to the degree of an HSM. An HSM is like a dedicated hardware appliance in your environment that is only for generating these secure keys. But it's for storage management, everything for your organization. Let me try sending that link one more time. I'm going to try it in Twitch itself. Yeah, let me know if you see that link now. But it is, I am simulcasting on YouTube, and then this gets saved automatically. It gets uploaded right away to YouTube. So I have it for all time. It's forever on the internet. All right, so your public and private keys. So this is your asymmetric encryption. So big thing is the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. This essentially is how you take your public and private keys, which are very slow because you have one key to encrypt, one key to decrypt, but it is very secure. But if you have something like a stream cipher, you're not going to be able to use asymmetric encryption because the speed of it isn't fast enough to keep up with encrypting one bit at a time. And if it was, the processor load is going to be so high that everything's going to bog down. So essentially where it starts is you have common colors. So this is the image that I used to learn it. But you have a shared, like a common color or a common key, and then each person chooses a secret. And their secret color, you mix it with the common color, you get the mixed color. So when, say, an attacker is eavesdropping, they can only see the shared key, so your public key, and then they see the final output, and you don't see the secret. When you exchange the mixed colors and then add back your secret color, so this is essentially sending over encrypted data and then using that secret to decrypt it. So common color, that's your public key. Secret is your private key. So Bob here has the public key, adds it with the private key. His private key ends up with this. And then when you bring it back and then add back in that secret color, you have essentially the shared secret at that point. You have essentially a value that is unique to both of you because you have your secrets, you have your commonalities, and because you exchange these mixed colors, but you don't have the secrets, you end up at the same point at the end because of the exchange, but that secret is going to be unique to this pair of communications. And at that point, that shared secret is your symmetric key. So you use your asymmetric keys, share them, mix them back together, and then you have your shared secret. And that is what you can use for something like a stream cipher or for faster communication with a symmetric algorithm. So it makes it a lot quicker, but it is still extremely secure because that whole exchange is heavily encrypted. So biggest things as far as how things are encrypted and decrypted. So for confidentiality, sender always encrypts with the recipient's public key, because that recipient will be the only person that can decrypt it with their private key. And then for signatures, the sender encrypts it with their private key, so the recipient can use the sender's public key to verify that the sender actually sent it because they encrypted it with their private key. So because if the sender encrypted it with their public key, nobody would be able to decrypt it. So when you're sending it to somebody, you send it to them with their public key, but they're the only one that has the private key that can decrypt it, and vice versa. So that's the biggest thing with asymmetric is always have the other side that has to be there in order to decrypt it. So it's not necessarily a one-way function, but it is you cannot decrypt with the same key you encrypted with. So digital certificates are essentially it's a secure way to provide an unknown third party, so somebody like me, a trusted copy of an organization, like their public key. So when I go to bestbuy.com, I get a certificate from them, and Bitdefender issues the certificate, signs that certificate, verifying that they have done their due diligence to verify that, bestbuy.com is in fact Best Buy Company Incorporated. And here's the certificate, and here is the public key. And to verify that is in fact their public key. And Bitdefender, being a trusted third party, is essentially saying that yes, we have done the work, we've actually seen this, and we know that this is in fact them. So it gives you that trust that it's not just Best Buy saying yes, we are who we say we are, because anybody can do that at that point. You have a certificate authority, which would be Bitdefender in this case, that is signing that public key, signing that certificate with their private key, so you can verify it using their public key. So again, it's back to that encrypt and decrypt with public key, private key. But it essentially is you're able to validate the actual ownership of that particular key. Certificates can be revoked. They can be put on a certificate revocation list, a CRL. And CRLs tend to be slower to be able to search quickly. Like if you're trying to load up a web page and verify that certificate, it could take a while for your browser to do that. So there's a protocol called the OSCP. I think it should be OCSP. But it's an online certificate status protocol. It is a real-time certificate verification. So essentially there's a protocol that it sends it out and says, hey, is this certificate good? Yes. Okay, good. And it happens lightning fast. So you don't even realize that your browser is doing this, but it'll reach out and check those certificates in real time to make sure that they've not been revoked. And then, like we were looking at on the HSM diagram, certificates can be self-signed. So internally within your organization, if you've got something that is not internet facing, that nobody's going to be seeing outside of the inside of the organization, you can have internal certificates within the organization to verify that this server is what it says it is, this is who it is accessing it. But yeah, you don't use them for public use or anything like that. But it's just an extra layer of security that you can use, but it is a lot of work to manage your own certificates and everything else within your organization. Certificate formats and types, biggest one here, X509. That is going to be your primary, the one that you have to understand. That is the international standard for digital certificates. You know, X509 is for certificates. That is about all you need to know for the exam, as far as when they ask about what type of certificate it would be used for XYZ, and X509 is one of the answers. That's probably going to be the answer. Storing X509 certificates varies depending on the operating system and depending on what service is using those certificates. So you have two different kinds that are pretty much universal: the DER and PEM, and they're just stored just in a slightly different format. So the DER, distinguish encoding rules, is stored in a binary format. So it's going to end in .der, .crt, or .cer. PEM is your privacy enhanced mail. That is ASCII text. So it's going to be plain text of the DER format, and then it is stored as a .pem or .crt. So depending on a test question, both of these could be the .crt, but you have to think, okay, which one's binary, which one is ASCII, depending on how that test question is asked. The PFX is your personal information exchange binary format, most commonly used by Windows. And then P7B is also used by Windows, and that is ASCII format. So PFX is going to be .pfx or .p12, and then P7B is self-explanatory. It's .p7b. But I mean, the biggest way to remember here is I look at the numbers, because the other ones don't have numbers. If it's got numbers, I know that's Windows, or if it's got an X. So I think of that as PF10. So think Roman numerals. I've got numbers in these. I don't have numbers in these. So I know those are my Windows ones, and then I just got to figure out which one was the binary one. So it works for my brain. Hopefully it helps. But your certificates are, they have 3 different levels. So you have domain validation, organization validation, and extended validation. So domain validation is the lowest form of validation. This is what your certificate authority does. Essentially, that whoever's trying to get the certificate owns the domain. So they own that particular website. Organization validation actually verifies the name of the business purchasing that certificate in addition to the domain. And then extended validation, they actually verify that that organization physically exists at a registered address. So you have somebody that actually goes in and does their inspection at the organization to verify that they are who they say they are, and that, you know, it's not somebody sitting in their basement trying to scam people. So when you see it on the test, typically this question is going to say which is the most secure, and it's going to be extended validation. So it extends beyond domain or organization. So it's the highest, it's extended above, however you want to remember it, but that is how I would think of it. Domain is your lowest level, extended is your highest. All right, and that is everything for this evening. As far as the initial presentation goes, I do have some exam questions prepped on VVox. So if we want to go through that, I'll run through those and we can talk about it and kind of go through the topics there. And of course, if you have any questions or anything else, we can also chat while we are going through these questions. Feel free to drop them in chat, anything you got, and we will jaw jack while we study. So we can go ahead and join on the vvox.app. ID is 198611111. A whole lot of ones. So 1986 and 5 ones. But feel free to hop on in and we'll do some exam prep. So I'll go ahead and pop the first question up here. Which of the following objectives is not one of the 3 main objectives that information security professionals must achieve to protect their organization against cybersecurity threats? So it looks like we got about 70 y'all out there. Feel free to hop on in, participate. And that way we can talk about the answers. Sharon, thank you. Appreciate you coming out. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on here. So our answer here, the one that is not one of the 3 main objectives, is non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is a benefit of cryptography. And it is essential in cybersecurity, but it is not one of the 3 core main tenets. So think back to the CIA triad, your confidentiality, availability, and integrity. Those are going to be your the three most important. Non-repudiation is just a benefit that comes along with cryptography and being able to, it's a core value, and it is actually part of a larger diagram, which I'll pull up here real quick. Let's see, here it is. So this, find an image that, so this, the Parkerian hexad, is going to kind of encompass your non-repudiation when you get into authenticity and possession. So it does take in, so your overall security, you have confidentiality, integrity, availability, but authenticity, possession, and utility all fall under non-repudiation. And being able to, for the accounting, and being able to point a finger at somebody that they actually did do something. So this is probably something we're going to start to see over the next couple of years. It's starting to get a bigger foothold, but it is still not quite there. We're still on the CIA triad, so these three are our key, but we're getting there. It's eventually we're going to start to see this replace the CIA triad. But you do see it more when you get into like CISP and stuff like that. You'll start to see talk about the Parkerian hexad. So next question. Mike wants to stop vehicles from traveling toward the entrance of his building. What physical security control should he implement? Thank you, Jesse. Figure we'll go a little long this evening, being that it's a review and we're trying to do essentially what we did over 3 weeks in one evening. I'm happy to run long, so. So what would Mike use to stop vehicles from traveling towards the entrance of his building? How's he going to block them from breaking through the front door? So, I mean, a robotic sentry might work. I mean, that's going to be, maybe preventative control. I mean, but what we're looking for is a bollard. So when you're out front of, we'll use Best Buy again as an example. They've got the concrete posts that are covered with the plastic tubes that make them look pretty. Those are your bollards. They're typically reinforced with steel and driven down into the ground, and they are hard to break. So bollard would be what would prevent a vehicle from being able to crash through the front of a door or front of a building, or ramming through into a sensitive area. So yeah, I mean, they can look like pillars, planters, or other innocuous objects. They can be, you can have planters that are reinforced and bolted down to the ground, so when a vehicle hits it, they stop. Air gap is just a physical separation in technology environments. So just being able to have a computer that is not connected to the actual network would be air gapped if it has no connection to the production network or to another network. Hot aisle, so you have hot air and cold air in a data center. So you typically have your hot air in between racks of servers and it's getting pulled out, and then the cold air is being blown down in the front, or vice versa. But you normally alternate your hot and cold aisles within a data center. And then robotic sentries, they're not commonly deployed right now, and yeah, they're not ready to stop vehicles, but they could definitely be a deterrent or preventative if you had one patrolling around. or somebody's just going to walk up to your robotic sentry and just kick it over, and then it's not doing anything. So it'll kick over your robot Roomba sentry. So what term best describes an organization's desired security state? So what term best describes an organization's desired security state? So this one is kind of a trick question, because all of these could reflect on a desired security state, but it's really which one is the best of all the options. So try and think about which one of the answers kind of encompasses all of the, like, if they all sound very similar, the way that I look at it when there's a what term best describes is there one of these that encompasses more than one or two of the other ones? So I dig into a question like this and I look at it and I go, okay, so I've got control objectives, I've got security priorities. Those both sound really important, but I think back to my studies, like best practices would probably fall underneath, security priorities. Strategic goals probably also fall under that, but then control objectives would kind of encompass all of that, because your objectives would have your priorities, your goals, your best practices all within them. Maybe not broken down individually, but on a high level, all of that kind of falls underneath the control objectives. So essentially your control objectives look at your risk environment. Technical and business leaders determine the level of protection required to preserve your confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And they express these requirements by writing control objectives. So the objectives that the organization wishes to achieve. So they're your desired security state. Amish Runaway, we've got another 9 tries. You'll get one. But that's why we're here. We're here to learn. It's okay to get questions wrong. In fact, when I get questions wrong on exams, like I ran through a practice test today just to keep my mind sharp. And out of the 40 questions, I missed 4. So I got 90% on it. But those 4 questions, I went back and reviewed that material again and why I got it wrong. And in fact, this was one of the questions that I got wrong. So this one absolutely was a good one, and why I pulled it. So but yeah, I mean, so when I'm preparing for an exam, I'll take the questions that I get wrong, and like if I got this one wrong, I will make flashcards for control objectives, security priorities, best practices, strategic goals. I'll look up all the definitions in my study guide, my handy dandy study guide, and I will actually make flashcards out of them. So this one question, I get 4 flashcards out of it. They go in the pile. And between my practice exams, I'll review my flashcards. So if I miss 20 questions out of 100 on an exam that I set up, I'm going to end up with 80 flashcards. But because I took the time to write all of it down, look it up, and then understand it, and then repeat that when I'm going through the flashcards, all of a sudden it starts to sink in. And it's that repetition. I mean, that's part of the reason why we're reviewing again tonight, is it's just repetition, repetition, repetition. So that is the key for anything, is just do it again and again and again and again until it just becomes second nature. So there's always room to improve. Like I said, I got this one wrong on my exam today. So you don't necessarily have to have the book. I more use the book as a guide for developing my PowerPoints. I can honestly say I did not look at the book for Security Plus until I started actually teaching it. I primarily used videos. I was using resources on YouTube, Professor Messer, Dion's good, but he does go way off topic. So some of his lessons, he'll rant for 10 minutes on something that's not going to be on the exam. Mike Chappell does a great job as well. But I primarily use the videos because I can go and do something else while I'm listening to the video, and then I can also take notes on my phone real quick of things that I want to look up again and just understand a little bit further. So I'm a very big auditory learner, but I also learn by doing. So typically by listening to it and then going back and then looking up the stuff that I either don't already know or the stuff that I need to learn. I just need further explanation on. It ends up helping it sink in a little bit more for me. So it's all very dependent on how you learn. If you're somebody who likes to go through and actually highlight and stuff like that, then absolutely pick up a study guide or pick up one of the textbooks. But it's really up to your preference. So I'm not a big fan of sitting there and having to go through a 600-page book, but I use this one mostly because of the material and the explanations. It helps me just understand a little bit more. So, but what I do use, and I actually do not have one next to me right now, but I've got, actually, let me grab it real quick because they're right in the closet next to me. Be right back. All right, get you a notebook. Like, I picked this one up at a cybersecurity conference. Just a small, I mean, you can see it's like the size of my hand, but it is small, easy enough to carry around. But I've got my notes for my CISP in here. And so as I'm studying for it, and I've got something that I run across that I'm not super strong on, or I've got something else going on, I will write it down in my notebook. And then it reminds me to go back and look at it, but it gives me something that I can refer to. But I can throw this in my backpack and carry it with me if I'm going to an appointment or I'm going somewhere. I can have it with me to review anything that I've been struggling with. So you don't have to pay for them if you go to enough conferences and stuff like that. I've got a stack of probably 15 of these, and I use them for everything. So yeah, this one, the center of it's blank, but the first like 20 pages are full. So been working through CISP. But we'll move on to this question here. So Lisa sets up an account on a website that allows her to log in with Google. When she logs in, Google provides an access token to the website that confirms that she is who she says she is, but doesn't provide the site with her password. Which of the following technologies has she used? Is it LDAP, or Lightweight Directory Access Protocol? Is it OAuth, Open Authorization? Is it MITRE, or is it Radius? I've got our answers in. Y'all got it. OAuth. That is the correct answer there. So OAuth is your authentication protocol. Pretty much allows services to receive authentication tokens from an identity provider. So in this case, the identity provider is Google, without needing the user's password. That is correct. So Radius is an authentication technology, but it is primarily used within your enterprise network. So you're not going to see that out on the open internet. And then LDAP is part of SSO processes, again, used typically in a network. So Brian discovers that a user suspected of stealing sensitive information is posting many image files to a message board. What technique might the individual be using to hide sensitive information in those images? So we've got steganography, got homomorphic encryption, replay attack, or birthday attack. Answers are in. Great job. Yep, steganography. The art of using cryptographic techniques to embed secret messages within another file. That could be as simple as something like an image and just changing the changing colors by 1 bit, you can actually hide a message inside of an image. Steganography is super cool. It's fun to play with, and then trying to find the messages within it is awesome too. So Ginger has been issued a USB security key as part of her organization's multi-factor implementation. What type of implementation is this? Is this considered a hard token, a biometric token, a soft token, or an attestation token?
Struggling to find the perfect music for your productions? MusicVine is home to the best production music in the world for productions that demand more. License a higher quality of music with MusicVine.
All right, we'll give it a few more seconds. There we go. All right, so the correct answer here is a hard token. So because it is a hard or a physical item, that is your hard token. It would be a USB security key. Application, so if you're using like Google Authenticator or Ping ID or something like that, that would be a soft token because it is a software token. Biometric would be typically a fingerprint or face identification. Technically, it is considered a token because you're using essentially those data points on a fingerprint or face print as that token to verify. And then attestation is formal verification that something is true. That's actually a made-up answer. So you technically, by providing a token, that is you giving an attestation, but an attestation token is not a actual thing. So which of the following data protection techniques is reversible when conducted properly? So which of these can you reverse? So when I look at these, I'm thinking, what do I know about each of these answers? You know, shredding, if I've got that machine next to my desk that I shove paper into, you know, it's depending on how well it shreds, I'm probably not going to be able to reverse that. Hashing, we know hashes are one-way functions. The only way you can't undo a hash, but you can reference hashes to get a password. And masking, you're covering up parts of a string. You're covering up parts of that data, but it doesn't really give you a way to reverse it. So tokenization is going to be our answer there. So tokenization, essentially, you can take, say my name is in a table, and so Taylor's there, but you change out that token for cyber hamburglar. That essentially is what that value is going to be in that database, and maybe in another table you have Taylor equals cyber hamburglar. So you have replaced my name with a token in that particular file, which anonymizes it, or removes that original value. So if it's something like say like a social security number or something like that, you can actually tokenize it. You can encrypt it using a hash. You can use any number of different ways to convert that data into something else. And you actually you're replacing that with a substitute value, and then somewhere else you have a mapping table to map those values back. Wouldn't necessarily see public and private keys used for this. Tokenization more is just it's referencing. So it's like, I mean, you've got values that reference each other in one table, so you have a map of you know, A equals Z, B equals Y on a table, but you've taken A and B out of the original data and replaced them with Z and Y. So it's more just, it's anonymizing the data. It's trying to remove sensitive data and replace it with something that is not sensitive. But you still have a way to reverse it if you have a table to map it back somewhere else. So that's why it would be reversible. So yeah, tokenization techniques use a lookup table and are designed to be reversible. So what component of a zero trust architecture forwards requests from subjects and acts on whether subjects are allowed to access resources? So which component actually forwards requests from subjects? So if we think about the diagram that we had, you had the enterprise, you had the user, and then there's that junction, and then there was stuff above it. So if we think about that diagram, if somebody is sending data, where are they sending the data to first in that list of actions? So that would be how I think about a question like this. Like if I was kind of going through it, I would be looking at, okay, where were the gateways, where were the engines, where were the administrators, where were the enforcement points? So you just got to think about where, when you send that request, what does it hit before it goes to where all the decisions are actually made. We got both your answers in. Y'all rock. Awesome. Heck yeah. Policy enforcement points. Yep, that is your communication point. Communicates the policy administrators, essentially. Yeah, the policy administrators are the components that establish or remove the communication path between subjects and resources. So they pretty much say, at the enforcement point, it forwards it to the administrators. Administrators say, yes, we can go ahead and create that connection, or no, we need to remove that connection. So creating those session tokens and supplying credentials are two things that those administrators can actually do. Policy engines are a function of that. They actually will make decisions based on both the rules that are set in place that the administrators will use, but also external systems. So things like your SIM, monitoring, and things like that, that those external influences can allow the policy engine to pass on different instructions to the administrators. And then policy gateways are not reference components for zero trust. So that's a non-answer. But great job, guys. I missed this one earlier today. I had chosen policy administrators. So great job. So Tanya is concerned about the risk that an attacker will attempt to gain access to her organization's database server. She is searching for a control that would discourage the attacker from attempting to gain access. What type of security control is she seeking to implement? So she is looking for a control that would discourage the attacker from attempting to gain access. Yeah, Amish Runaway, that is one of the biggest things, is looking at diagrams, kind of looking at the flow on things, and just trying to create that mental picture when you're looking at something like that, and being able to, when you're sitting there at the exam, okay, what do I know about this? I remember a diagram, I remember seeing this, I remember something like that, and then use that to help guide you to your answers, or even knock out two of the four, so you get a 50-50 shot of getting the correct answer. So that's the best thing, is always kind of go with your gut, but also try and eliminate answers from the possibilities as well. So we've got your answers in. And deterrent controls. Great job. Yep, designed to prevent an attacker from attempting to violate security policies in the first place. So preventative controls would attempt to block an attack, but deterrent will just keep them from actually even attempting it. Great job. So what term best describes data that is being sent between two systems over a network connection? So is it data at rest, data in transit, data in processing, or data in use? So this one, right off the bat, I look at it and I go, okay, data that's being sent between two systems, well, that data is no longer at rest. So now I've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting this one correct. Like I said, you start looking at these exam questions and just think about which ones can I eliminate given how this question's written, and then it improves your chances of getting the question correct. Answers are in. So data in transit would be the correct answer here. So data in transit essentially is data on the move. Your data in processing is data in use. Those two are synonymous. But that is data that's actively being used by a particular system. So though that data is being used in that transmission, technically, it's data in transit, and then data in use is actually being processed on a specific device. So if that data is being transmitted and then being used, it's actually changing states as it goes from data at rest to data in transit to data in use at its destination. And then it may go back to being at rest once it's actually been used. So it is data in transit. So, I mean, I look at it as data at rest is sitting on the hard drive and nobody's looking at it. Data in transit is actually on the network. And then data in use is like the applications I have running right now, ones that are actually playing music or recording video, things like that. That data is actually in use. So what key concept below describes only providing permissions necessary to perform a role? This is another core tenet of cybersecurity. One of the foundational tenet of cybersecurity here. Is it least privilege, best practice, ephemeral accounts, mandatory access control? All right, so least privilege. So principle of least privilege means that users should only be given permissions necessary to perform their role. So essentially, when you provision a user, only giving them access to the tools that they need to do their job and not giving them more access than they're supposed to have. So you don't have somebody in human resources that has access to financial data for the company, or you have an IT guy that has access to human resources files. So that principle of least privilege just means that only the people that are supposed to see that data or use those applications can use those applications. Mandatory access control is one of the access control schemes. We will probably get into that in one of the later sections, if I remember correctly. But you've got different levels of access control, which all kind of tie back into least privilege. So this is another one of those questions where this 4-letter word, best, comes up. And because mandatory access control and role-based access control, all the access control schemes fall under, or can fall under, the principle of least privilege, it makes least privilege the best answer. So that is one of the words that CompTIA loves, is best. They love putting that in their questions. So it makes it you have to actually sit there and think about all the different tiers and which one would be closest to what they're actually looking for or encompasses all the other ones. So Adam wants to increase his organization's password resistance to attacks in the event that the password hash database is stolen by attackers. Which of the following password security settings has the largest impact on password cracking if his organization's current passwords are 8 characters long? So we didn't technically cover this, but I figured this would be a fun one to finish up on. So password complexity. So makes me think uppercase, lowercase, symbols, numbers. Password length. So they made their passwords longer. Password reuse limitations, or preventing use of common words in passwords. So he's wanting to increase the resistance for attacks. Which one of these would be the largest impact if currently their passwords are only 8 characters long? So there's different tiers to password security. Oh, all right. Had an answer change there, it looked like. All right. So essentially the way that it breaks down is the biggest impact is always password length. You have a longer password, it takes longer to crack. Well, trust your gut, Amish runaway. So when paired with a strong password, hashing algorithm, and proper use of technology like salting long passwords are much harder to crack. Complexity would be your next most important. So once you have sufficiently long passwords, then complex passwords are next. And then after that, you start to put in things like reuse limitations and preventing common words. An organization that I worked at years ago, they didn't have us use traditional passwords. Like they required that we had spaces in there. We didn't necessarily have to have numbers or anything like that, but we just had to have upper and lowercase letters and spaces. So they pretty much wanted you to have a passphrase is what they told you. And it had to be a minimum of 12 characters. I remember one of my coworkers was having trouble with her computer, and her computer was locked out, and she's like, oh, just punch in my password for me. And I was like, well, what's your password? She goes, never trust a fart. I was like, alrighty then. Like, great. I don't think anybody would have just guessed that password, and it's sufficiently long where trying to crack that password would probably take a while if you had the hash of it. So it was one of those that it's one of those passwords that I'll never forget once she told me, but it was like brilliant. But again, it's using passphrases. Use things that are easy for you to remember is stronger than using a complex password that looks like a hash. So it's using something that's 16, 20 characters, but it's an excerpt from a book or something that only you would know, or that means something to you, but you've not told other people about it, or nobody's going to know that. That secret is probably one of the most important things. Like, one of mine is I use a line out of a poem that I wrote for school in 6th grade. And it was absolute just silly nonsense, but I still remember the whole thing because it was so goofy. But I use a line out of that because it's easy for me to remember, but nobody's gonna know it because that poem doesn't exist anywhere anymore. It's been destroyed. Like, nobody could find it. It's never been published. It's never been put anywhere. I wrote it, turned that paper in, and then I'm pretty sure it got thrown out 20 years ago. So nobody's ever going to know. But yeah, that's the biggest thing with passwords is length over the complex characters and things like that. We can look at our leaderboard. Hey, not bad. Got one of y'all at 9 of 12 and the other at 7 of 12. rock on. But like I said, I mean, a lot of it just comes down to just repetition. I mean, repeating the questions and just going over tests and just continuing to study and practice what you get wrong. So
is the essential music licensing platform for pro.
Yeah, that is everything for this evening. I really appreciate y'all coming out and sticking through it with me. I know we've gone way long, going on almost an hour and 40 minutes here. No, you did great, Amish Runaway. Great job. And I mean, like I said, any questions you have, anything that, I mean, just reach out to me on Discord, on LinkedIn. You can absolutely just ping me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Same for you, Exam Slayer. I really appreciate y'all coming out and participating. So anything I can do to support you and get you that exam, get you that certification, I'm happy to do it. So thank y'all. But have a great rest of your evening and make it a great week. And I will see y'all next month.